is not simply the way life comes to us, but is the way all things really exist. In these talks, I've had to say a good deal about prayer. And before going on to my main subject tonight, I'd like to deal with a difficulty some people find about the whole idea of prayer. Somebody put it to me by saying, I can believe in God all right, but what I can't swallow is this idea of him listening to several 100 million human beings who are all addressing him at the same moment. And I find quite a lot of people feel that difficulty.
Welcome back. We're here with our book, Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. We've worked our way through several of the chapters and books, and we're now discussing Christian behavior. So again, to summarize, C.S. Lewis presented some radio lectures during World War II. He was asked to explain what Christians believe. And so he starts out laying a foundation for, is there a God? And what is the purpose of us here in this universe and the purpose of the universe? He moves from there to accepting that there is a God, accepting that that God is the God that we know is the God of the Jews, Yahweh. Then he moves from there to looking at the problems we've experienced and what would be some kind of solution. And that brings him to Jesus. So what we're now at the point where he's discussing Christian behavior. And so in our last lesson, we basically talked about morality. And the three major components of morality are behavior between people, behavior within a person, and then what is our purpose? How are we going to get someplace? And the purpose ultimately gets us back to God. So today we're going to look at a couple of sections under Christian behavior. The first one is morality and psychoanalysis. The second one is sexual morality. And the third one is Christian marriage. And so, as we do in most of our lessons, we read a bit and we just stop and discuss, and then we go from there. So let's read a bit. I've said that we should never get a Christian society unless most of us become Christian individuals. That does not mean, of course, that we can put off doing anything about society until some imaginary date in the far future. It means that we must begin both jobs at once. The job of seeing how do as you would be done by can be applied in detail to modern society. And two, the job of becoming the sort of people who really would apply it if we saw how. I now want to begin considering what the Christian idea of a good man is, the Christian specifications for the human machine. Before I come down to details, there are two more general points I'd like to make. First of all, since Christian morality claims to be a technique for putting the human machine right, I think you would like to know how it is related to another technique which seems to make a similar claim, namely psychoanalysis. Now you want to distinguish very clearly between the two things, between the actual medical theories and technique of the psychoanalyst and the general philosophical view of the world which Freud and some of the others have gone on to add to this. The second thing, the philosophy of Freud, is in direct contradiction to the other great psychologist, Jung. And furthermore, when Freud is talking about how to cure neurosis, he is speaking as a specialist on his own subject. But when he goes on to talk general philosophy, he is speaking as an amateur. I do know something about, namely language. He is very ignorant. But psychoanalysis itself, apart from all the philosophical additions that Freud and others have made, is not in the least contradictory to Christianity. Its techniques overlap with Christian morality at some points, and it would not be a bad thing if every person knew something about it. But it does not run the same course all the way, for the two techniques are doing rather different things. When a man makes a moral choice, two things are involved. One is the act of choosing. The other is the various feelings, impulses, and so on, which his psychological outfit presents him with, and which are the raw materials of his choice. Now, the raw materials may be of two kinds. Either it may be what's called normal. It may consist of the sort of feelings that are common to all men, or it may consist of quite unnatural feelings due to things that have gone wrong in his subconscious. We talk about normal psychology, normal psychosis within ourselves, and then abnormal. And this is where psychoanalysis comes into play, because that is trying to address the abnormal behavior of mankind, and it's also trying to address the challenge we have between good and evil and our behavior. We do evil things, as Paul has said. I try to do what I know is right, but I fail continuously. He writes, people often think of Christian morality as a kind of bargain in which God says, if you keep a lot of the rules, I will reward you, and if you don't, I'll do the other thing. I do not think that is the best way of looking at it. In taking your life as a whole, with all the innumerable choices, all your life long you're slowly turning this central thing either into a heavenly creature or into a hellish creature, either into a creature that is in harmony with God and with other creatures and with itself, or else into one that is in a state of war and hatred with God and with its fellow creatures and with itself. Each of us at each moment is progressing to the one state or the other. Remember, the right direction leads not only to peace and to knowledge. When a man is getting better, he understands more and more clearly the evil that is still left in him. When a man is getting worse, he understands his own badness less and less. A moderately bad man knows he is not very good. A thoroughly bad man thinks he is all right. This is common sense, really. You understand sleep when you're awake, not while you're sleeping. You can see mistakes in arithmetic when your mind is working perfectly. While you're making them, you cannot see them. You can understand the nature of drunkenness when you're sober, not when you're drunk. Good people know about both good and evil. Bad people do not know about either. This leads us into the next section on sexual morality. Now again, I want to remind the viewers, this is C.S. Lewis writing. It is not an apostle. It is not a prophet. He is a professor of literature at he was, he's not alive now, at a university in England. He's been asked to do this, to explain Christianity to the general population, and he's taken on this task. Now he's moving into areas that he will acknowledge. Sometimes he's an expert, but he's doing the best to the best of his ability. He's explaining things. So now we're in the section entitled Sexual Morality. We must now consider Christian morality as regards sex, what Christians call the virtue of chastity. The Christian rule of chastity must not be confused with the social rule of modesty, in one sense of the word, propriety or decency. The social rule of propriety lays down how much of the human body should be displayed and what subjects can be referred to and in what words according to the custom of a given social circle. Thus, while the rule of chastity is the same for all Christians at all time, the rule of propriety changes. A girl in the Pacific Islands wearing hardly any clothes and a Victorian lady completely covered in clothes might both be equally modest, proper, or decent according to the standards of their own society. And both, for all we could tell by their dress, might be equally chaste or equally unchaste. So again, this gets us to the point where he's saying chastity is the most unpopular of the Christian virtues. There's no getting away from it. The Christian rule is either marriage with complete faithfulness to your partner or else total abstinence. Now, this is so difficult and so contrary to our instincts that obviously either Christianity is wrong or our sexual instinct, as it now is, has gone wrong. One or the other. Of course, being a Christian, I think it is the instinct which has gone wrong. But I have other reasons for thinking so. The biological purpose of sex is children, just as the biological purpose of eating is to repair the body. Everyone knows that the sexual appetite, like our other appetites, grows by indulgence. Starving men may think much about food, but so do gluttons. The gorged, as well as the famished, like titillation. You find very few people who want to eat things that are really not food, or do things with food instead of eating it. In other words, perversions of the food appetite are rare. But perversions of the sex instinct are numerous, hard to cure, and frightful. I'm sorry to have to go into all the details, but I must. The reason why I must is that you and I, for the last 20 years, so this would be from the 1920s to the 1940s, have been fed all day long solid lies about sex. We have been told, till one is sick of hearing it, that sexual desire is the same as any other of our natural desires, and if only we abandon the silly old Victorian idea of hushing it up, everything in the garden will be lovely. They tell you sex has become a mess because it has been hushed up. But for the last 20 years, it has not been. It has been chattered about all day long. Yet it's still a mess. Christianity says the pleasure is not the problem. It is not the thing nor the pleasure that is the trouble. Christianity is almost the only one of the great religions that thoroughly approves of the body, which believes that matter is good, that God Himself once took on a human body, that some kind of body is going to be given us, even in heaven, is going to be an essential part of our happiness or beauty or energy. There are 3 reasons why it is especially difficult for us to desire, let alone to achieve, complete chastity. In the first place, our warped natures, the devils who tempt us, and all the contemporary propaganda for lust combine to make us feel that the desires we are resisting are so natural, so healthy, and so reasonable that it is almost perverse and abnormal to resist them. Poster after poster, film after film, novel after novel associate the idea of sexual indulgence with the ideas of health, normality, youth, frankness, and good humor. This association is a lie. Surrender to all our desires obviously leads to impotence, disease, jealousy, lies, concealment, and everything that the reverse of health, good humor, and frankness. For any happiness, even in this world, quite a lot of restraint is necessary. Second, many people are deterred from seriously attempting Christian chastity because they think it is impossible. Never mind. Try. After each failure, ask forgiveness, pick yourself up, and try again. Very often what God first helps us towards is not the virtue itself, but just this power of always trying again. It cures our illusions about ourselves and teaches us to depend on God. Third, people often misunderstand what psychology teaches about repressions. It teaches us that repressed sex is dangerous, but repressed is here a technical term. It does not mean suppressed in the sense of denied or resisted. A repressed desire thought is one which has been thrust into the subconscious and can now come before the mind only as a disguised and unrecognizable form. Virtue, even attempted virtue, brings light. Indulgence brings fog. Finally, though I had to speak at some length about sex, I want to make it as clear as possible that the center of Christian morality is not here. If anyone thinks that Christians regard unchastity as the supreme vice, he's quite wrong. The sins of the flesh are bad, but they are the least bad of sins. All the worst pleasures are purely spiritual. The pleasure of putting other people in the wrong, of bossing and patronizing and spoiling sport, and backbiting, the pleasures of power of hatred. For there are two things inside me, competing with the human self which I try to become. They are the animal self and the diabolical self. The diabolical self is the worst of the two. This is why a cold, self-righteous prig who goes regularly to church may be far nearer to hell than a prostitute. But of course, it is better to be neither. So, he talks a little bit about sex and the virtue of chastity. And then he dives into Christian marriage, which even he finds this kind of humorous, because if you know anything about C.S. Lewis, he was, for most of his life, a bachelor. I'm not sure all his life. He had a romance later in life. But this next section is on Christian marriage. The last chapter was mainly negative. I discussed what was wrong with the sexual impulse in man, but said very little about its right working. In other words, about Christian marriage. There are two reasons why I do not particularly want to deal with marriage. The first is the Christian doctrine on this subject are extremely unpopular. The second is that I've never been married myself and therefore cannot speak and can only speak at second hand. But in spite of that, I feel I can hardly leave the subject out of an account of Christian morals. The Christian idea of marriage is based on Christ's words that a man and a wife are to be regarded as a single organism. For that is what the words one flesh would be in modern English. The inventor of human machine was telling us that its two halves, the male and the female, were made to be combined together in pairs. Not simply on the sexual level, but totally combined. The monstrosity of sexual intercourse outside marriage is that those who indulge in it are trying to isolate one kind of union, the sexual, from all the other kinds of union which were intended to go along with it and make up the total union. As a consequence, Christianity teaches that marriage is for life. There is, of course, a difference here between different churches. Some do not admit divorce at all, some allow it reluctantly, in some special cases. But if we consider this modern view in its relation to chastity, we must not forget to consider it in relation to another virtue, justice. Justice, as I said before, includes the keeping of promises. Not everyone who has been married in a church has made a public, solemn promise to stick to his or her partner to death. The duty of keeping that promise has no special connection with sexual morality. It is in the same position as any other promise. To this, someone may reply that he regarded the promise made in church as a mere formality and never intended to keep it. Whom then was he trying to deceive when he made it? God? That was really very unwise. Himself? That was not very much wiser. The bride or bridegroom or the in-laws? That was treacherous. More often, I think the couple or one of them hoped to deceive their public. They wanted the respectability that's attached to marriage without intending to pay the price. If people do not believe in permanent marriage, it is perhaps better that they should live together unmarried than they should take vows that they do not mean. The idea that being in love is the only reason for remaining married really leaves no room for marriage as a contract or promise at all. As Chesterton pointed out, those who are in love have a natural inclination to bind themselves by promises. There are several sound social reasons to provide a home, especially for children, to protect the woman. This is who has probably sacrificed or damaged her own career by getting married from being dropped whenever the man is tired of her. But there's also another reason. It's hard because so many people cannot be brought to realize that when B is better than C, A may be even better than B. They like thinking in terms of good and bad, not of good, better, best, or bad, worst, and worse. They want to know whether you think patriotism is a good thing. If you reply that it is, of course, far better than individual selfishness, but that is inferior to universal charity and should always give way to universal charity when the two conflict. They think that you are being evasive. What we call being in love is a glorious state. Love is the great conqueror of lust. But as I said before, the most dangerous thing you can do is to take any one impulse of our own nature and set it up as the thing you ought to follow at all cost. Being in love is a good thing, but it is not the best thing. There are many things below it, but there are also things above it. You cannot make it the basis of a whole life. It is a noble feeling, but it is still a feeling. No feeling can be relied on to last in its full intensity, or even to last at all. Knowledge can last, principles can last, habits can last, but feelings come and go. But of course, ceasing to be in love need not mean ceasing to love. Love in this second sense, love is distinct from being in love, is not merely a feeling. It is a deep unity maintained by the will and deliberately strengthened by habit, reinforced by, in Christian marriages, the grace by which both partners ask and receive from God. This quieter love enables them to keep the promise. It is on this love that the engine of marriage is run. Being in love was the explosion that started it. And then he goes on to talk about books and plays and all the many poetry and all the other things that we are under this, that provide us with images and stories of romance that think we too, that is the norm, so to speak. Before leaving this question, and he's talking about divorce, I'd like to distinguish two things which are often very confused. The Christian conception of marriage is one. The other is the quite different question: how far Christians, if they are voters or members of Parliament, ought to try to force their views of marriage on the rest of the community by embodying them in the divorce laws. A great many people seem to think if you're a Christian yourself, you should try to make divorce difficult for everyone. I do not think that. There ought to be two distinct kinds of marriage. One governed by the state with rules enforced on all citizens. The other governed by the church with rules enforced by their own members. That's quite a statement in 1942 in Britain. But that's where he comes out. The state shouldn't be governing that. There should be civil marriages, and then there should be religious marriages. Now, in the last section, he talks about Christian wives promising to obey their husbands. He talks about the man being the head of the household, and so on and so on. Now, he says, being a bachelor, he really has only seen this from the outside, and it's kind of humorous in some ways. He says, but there's also another reason for the man being the head of the household. Here I speak quite frankly as a bachelor, because it is a reason you can see from outside even better from the inside. I'm not sure you see better from the outside than the inside. The relations of the family to the outer world, which might be called foreign policy. So in this case, he says the man is more judicial in governing the family than the woman. I'm not so sure of that. I probably, if I had the wherewithal, I would be willing to debate this with him. He has the last word in order to protect other people from the intense family patriotism of the wife. So we can stop there, but C.S. Lewis is getting us to a place which we all need to be. He's telling us that really to have a Christian society It's dependent on not our preachers and not our politicians. It's dependent on each one of us, you and me. And as we become more Christian, then our society has a chance to become more Christian. And again, he's going to talk about us as a society, but he's really going to talk more about us as individuals and how we can practice the virtues. He's talked about several of them already, but we're going to continue this discussion on Christian virtues in our next lesson. So thank you very much for spending this time with us, and hope you have a great day.